When most people hear of polygonal stonework, they tend to associate it with a lost civilization that disappeared with little trace a long time ago. In this video, I want to show you that our civilization, we ourselves remembered and knew how to use this technique not in the faraway past, but just a couple of short 100 years ago. The official history of this fort is that it was supposedly built some 130 years ago by the Austro-Hungarian Empire because the local people started rioting and the empire created this as a stronghold of its authority at that time. Even in the official history of the place, we see a hint that there was something before that, but of course we are not given detail what was that something. It only says that it replaced an existing structure on the site. Now, looking at the actual fort, many questions arise. Now, we are told that this was built by the military in a hurry under the pressure of riots around you, but you are not looking at the rioting peasants around, but instead you find that this is the right time to become art maniac and build your fort with very complex Romaic arches that have complex curving planes in few dimensions. This requires enormous extra expenditure in terms of time and money to hire such skilled masons that would measure each and every particular stone on the spot so that it fits the complex curves in few planes. Each individual stone should perfectly fill the curve of the ceiling and then the curve of the arc on the side. Have you ever even tried to cut two wooden pieces so that they form a beautiful angle when put together afterwards? Even one such simple junction will require some extra attention and craftsmanship. Then based on that, just try to imagine how much time needs to be invested in each of these stones, because each of them is unique and has to be on the spot adjusted to perfectly match the surrounding stones. This is unimaginably complex work, especially if they were using the techniques that we know of, that we imagine the stonemasons used 130 years ago. So while the locals are rioting and shooting at your doorstep, apparently the Austro-Hungarian military were into fine arts, and if you do something, let's do it well. They were not satisfied with ordinary building. Look at this ceiling height. This is 5-6 meters. Each and every stone, polygonal masonry, each and every stone has to be carved, worked on by its own. They are not standard stones. Were they parking their tanks there? That's one luxurious tank parking. And by the way, there could be no tanks there because the full building, the full fort, at least 3 stories high, is below ground level. It is situated in a large pit, a large hole in the ground that has been dug, by the way, into the solid bedrock. It's not just soil there. There is no road, no tanks could go inside. So the question arises, what kind of technology, for what did they need these high ceilings, large holes? And then this what looks like windows are very strange. At first glance, they look like loopholes or arrow slits. I'm not sure even how is it called in English, but they're not. These are just holes. There is no actual opening to make it a window. And that's how it looks on the inside. Large hole, something unexplainable inside. Again, what kind of technology were they using? Who were they? As you can see on the inside, there are no windows or loopholes or anything like that. But to be fair, there are few real loopholes in the building, like these ones, but most of them had to be readjusted. Look at this. Obviously, the top stone was additionally broken to accommodate their weapons. Well, apparently the Austro-Hungarian military was so much into fine art and curved arches that they forgot to take into account what kind of weapons would they be using so that they can make the proper loopholes for them. And when the rioting peasants reached the building, oh, they figured out our weapons don't fit here, let's make bigger holes so that we can shoot. And then we go on the top of the building. Over there we see two large domes. One of them has a very Austro-Hungarian looking inscription on it. And the other one, yes, that looks like some sort of device that could be used for shooting from it safely without being hit. I mean, shooting through these cemented holes. And then we get the feeling, oh yes, this could have been designed as a military fort after all, we just don't understand their logic. But this feeling starts evaporating when you go below this dome. Surprisingly enough, there is no way to access it from below. This is what we see, a corridor that ends with a narrow dead end. And it really seems that this was the original design, because this fort has not been redone. It is currently absolutely abandoned. It hasn't been used for any other than military purposes, so that a dead-end corridor could not be a later on addition. And again, we come back to the original question, what is this all about? On the top floor, where you would expect indeed to have some loopholes, because from there you have a chance to shoot to the rioters that are supposedly coming to you. Over there you get large windows as if it is a hotel or a resort of some sort. And then look at the quality of the stonework on the upper left-hand side wall. Obviously, this is a completely different story. It cannot compare with the building quality of the original building. Maybe this was what was actually added in year 1885, and the actual fort was the remains from the structure before. The window also shows some evidence that the initial stonemasons were much more advanced than the reusers of the structure later on. Again, a striking contrast in the building quality. This is another shot showing the obvious differences between the two generations of stonemasons that worked here. So was this fort really built in 1886, or was the earlier structure given a new frisure at that time? That we cannot answer at the moment, but in any case, this is not an ancient structure because we see practically no erosion on it. It looks pretty newish. And this does look like a genuine Austro-Hungarian inscription of this period, but that is not extremely helpful because the domes are on the top. Obviously they have been added later on because they were cemented. They do not belong to the original structure, so they can't help us date the original one. And then instead of using some sort of easy and faster methods to make the ceilings, they decided to go the hardest way possible, at least for our understanding, and make it out of relatively small stones. Their size would be some approximately 30 centimeters. On one side, this shows how little do we know of the building techniques that were used, let's say, 130 years ago, or even somewhat earlier than that. Still, it doesn't change the situation, and on the other hand, proves a distant connection, for example, with the technique used in Baalbek. Over there in the tunnels, we see the absolutely same thing. It makes no sense, but they have used small stones for the ceiling. If one goes there nowadays, the two stories are more or less accessible, but there are doors leading to even lower levels, and God knows what's there. It's quite dangerous due to animals and darkness and cobwebs and I don't know what else. But it's quite amazing how much of work has been done and how much of this solid bedrock has been removed. A very deep shaft, again maybe carved into the solid bedrock. Water is seen on the distant bottom, if there is any bottom. Strange, such shafts seem to be found beneath many other ancient structures that use polygonal stonework. Although this fort poses more questions rather than answering anything, still I would like to suggest a few conclusions. First of all, just see the quality of stonework few hundred years ago. And then compare it with the ugly cement and brick addition on the top, which dates to a later stage. That's how it looks on the inside. It's got even a date. A helpful time stamp, a milestone in the progressive degradation of our building capabilities. And then the crown jewel of all beauty in the vicinity is this modern bridge. This is lovely, just look at its aesthetics. I think we are quite near to our final destinations, becoming full-fledged monkeys. I really do understand that some of us can have difficulties with the fact that we are turning into monkeys very soon. And I have a solution, don't you worry. It will all happen without you feeling anything at all. Something like anesthetic. Since most of us spend their lives in a digital trance, you will not notice the reality around. Thousands of people hypnotized even by small hypnosis devices like cell phones. They walk into traffic, they fall off cliffs by thousands because they become completely disconnected with the reality around, and they stop making difference between their own thoughts and those given by the hypnotic device. So if a small cell phone can give such outstanding results, then just imagine the magnitude of the hypnosis caused by your hypnotic box at home, the TV set, your domestic hypnoset. But don't you worry, you won't even feel or understand the transition to a complete monkey circus society. Moreover, this is a well-tested and proven working method. Mass media has already managed to erase people's memory, even in terms of how their forefathers were building such amazing structures only 100 or 200 years ago. Our building techniques have managed to degrade so fast to such an extent, see the proof with your own eyes, so I really don't see any problem for the rest of program for monketeering the full human society very soon, happening on a schedule. And actually this fort in Montenegro, Chernogora, is one out of the many. For example, in previous videos we saw aqueducts in France that were exhibiting full-fledged polygonal and megalithic masonry. And probably the best example of all remains the full old city of St. Petersburg. Polygonal stonework all over, huge megaliths, palaces that we nowadays will have extreme difficulty replicating, but all of that is in the episode called Monkeys Build Megaliths. The ruins of Sodom and Gomorrah in Israel. The balls of pure sulfur that rained from the skies and burned the cities to ashes are still to be found in the area even nowadays. Some of them are still seen embedded in the walls of the ancient buildings, while many others still cover the ground till nowadays, forming a blanket. Just imagine what kind of quantity of pure sulfur must have rained from the skies, and with what kind of force did it target the earth to be able to penetrate the walls of stone buildings. This fearsome weapon that turns everything living and non-living into ashes functions till nowadays. All it needs is to be ignited. It is even hard to imagine what kind of extreme, really hellish temperatures must have been reached for this stone to melt and start boiling. This kind of swirly patterns are by no means a natural formation. This boulder was simply exposed to such a monstrous heat that it turned liquid and boiled instantly. All living beings turned into ashes immediately, while the buildings are barely recognizable. Remains of doors and windows. This is one of the best preserved buildings. It's got symmetric four-corner design with straight angles, and the sophisticated shape of the outer walls is symmetric on all sides. These are the remains of the city walls. These are the results of the chemical test done on the sulfur from Sodom and Gomorrah. This type of sulfur, the pure one, does not occur naturally, so we are definitely talking about some sort of weapon that we know absolutely nothing about. And since this incident, this bombing has been so well described in the Bible, so well confirmed by the archaeological findings, probably the rest of the story is true as well, that this area was with lush greenery and pleasant climate before this terrible thing happened. Interesting, how did the cities look like before they were destroyed? How did the residents look like? The reason for which everybody has heard about Sodom and Gomorrah, and the reason for which people have been looking for their actual ruins, is that these cities are included in the current version of the Bible, the Gospels that are currently included in this Holy Scripture. Is it possible that in the Gospels that did not survive till our current times, there were much more details given about this Star Wars? Yes, I think exactly Star Wars is the most appropriate term for this because let's put it in plain words. Somebody shooting artificially manufactured weapon to the earth from space. What else should we call it? It is not a secret that most of the Gospels that were in circulation when the Christianity was still a young movement, barely a religion, are simply not available to us, and it is more likely that the information in those Gospels is much more correct from historical point of view because the people lived much closer to the times when these events happened and in many cases even witnessed them. Nor it is a secret that the Gospels that did reach us did so in a heavily edited form. Various rulers through ages adjusted them to suit their political ends. Preserving the historical authenticity of the events didn't seem to have been a priority for the people editing the Bible. So is it possible that we know only of few separate events out of a full chain of Star Wars? No doubt, the expedition of Nikolai Subotin to Uzbekistan was indeed organized as an attempt to recover some of the lost history of the region, but all its members were surprised by what kind of piece exactly from the historic puzzle did they find. It was not what they expected. The target of the expedition were ancient fortresses, officially some 2,500 to 3,000 years old, which are currently in a pretty bad condition officially due to weather erosion. When they arrived, they started noticing that they are located in a supposedly natural valley that has a suspiciously oval shape. It looks like a crater with 5 kilometers of diameter. The area was covered with countless pieces of black slag. It seems that for some unknown reason, the top layer of the sand burned at some point. On the edge of this crater, there are groups of fulgurite formations. The fulgurites are of really giant size for a fulgurite. The biggest of them would be usually 10-15 centimeters, while these ones are the size of a tree trunk. Fulgurites are formed when lightnings strike sand or stones. How big were the lightnings that struck this place? And as if this is not enough, there are tektites all over the place. What's a tektite? Petrographic and chemical characteristics of the tektites indicate that they were formed as a result of a rapid cooling from a high temperature at a melting point of above 2000 degrees Celsius, indicating catastrophic origins. Well, it really seems that something pretty dramatic happened here. Let's look a bit into the details to try to get further clues. First of all, at places the fortresses are covered with strange holes. They have a conus shape, as if somebody was repeatedly poking them with some sort of very sharp object. There is nothing stuck inside the holes. And there are not signs of erosion as well, because the holes are perfectly shaped and always of uniform conus form. So the more one looks at them, the more the official version that they were destroyed only by the weathering seems to hold less and less water. Another point, here we see two fortresses next to each other. The smaller one is quite well preserved, although as if somebody cut it with a knife at a certain height, but the other one is missing altogether. The huge fortress behind is leveled to the ground. Only the walls are left. If the bigger one was destroyed by the elements and time, at least the building material should have been piled up over there, but everything is completely gone missing. While the other one, which is built of the absolutely same bricks, is relatively very well preserved. Most likely, these holes were caused by something, the closest word to which would be meteorite shower, because the objects hit the fortresses obviously with great force, and they were parallel to each other. If they were uh, objects at all, they could have been some sort of energy as well. And the second is even more likely because, as we said, there is nothing stuck in those holes. And although the fortresses are made of bricks, they are not as flimsy as they seem, because the bricks by themselves weigh some 10 kilos each. They're that big and very, very hard. They're somehow extremely hardened by time, or because of their initial composition. It's not clear, but they seem misleadingly soft on the photos. People who have been actually there describe the walls as very much hardened monoliths. And now let's return to the very interesting fulgurites. Although there could be occasionally some petrified trees amongst these bunches of groups of weird objects protruding out of the sand around the edge of this 5-kilometer wide crater, still the majority of them could be described in simple words like something resembling pipes of material similar to glass or metal. Not only their material is not that of a petrified trees, but also if you pay attention, these really don't look like trees. I mean, trees don't grow in this fashion. See here, two pipes grow separately and then they start growing together. Or here, trees don't grow in this way, or in this way, for example, or in this way. Moreover, this feels and sounds like metal when you hit it. It's got the composition of a gigantic fulgurite. Here is an official piece of information regarding fulgurites. Fulgurites are natural tubes or crusts of glass formed by the fusion of a silica, quartz, sand, or a rock from a lightning strike. Their shape mimics the path of the lightning bolt as it disappears into the ground. All lightning strikes that hit the ground are capable of forming fulgurites. A temperature of 1800 degrees Celsius is required to instantaneously melt sand and form a fulgurite. Clarification: most lightning strikes have a temperature of 2500 degrees Celsius. Fulgurites have been found worldwide but are relatively rare. So to get back to Uzbekistan, our fulgurites are very, very fat. Of course, everything is possible. There could be some natural processes that are not well studied. Maybe the people of the Electric Universe and the Thunderbolt project are making attempts to bring the truth about them to the society, but they don't answer the question, how come these strange things always happen near important ancient sites? Most likely these were some sort of weapons that used weather control or controlling what we call the forces of nature. So basically at this point the boundary between natural and not starts becoming blurry. And let's for a minute just go to China and see the Baigong pipes. They are declared an absolute mystery. Well, they really look like fulgurites to me. Just look at them. Unfortunately, it's hard or impossible to find proper information and much photographs of the place. But in case the, I don't know, speculations or facts that there are pyramids nearby, or at least one, with an entry that you can see on these photographs. If that's the case, then, well, yet one more confirmation that we know very, very little of what has been going on our planet. We have no clue what our history has been, what kind of energy have been used and by whom. Especially the Baigong pipes are considered mysterious because they are found in extremely ancient layers of many hundreds of thousands of years at least. And always the mystery is formulated in this way. Who manufactured these pipes hundreds of thousands of millions ago? Well, they look like pure fulgurites to me. Just look at the photograph. It doesn't mean that all fulgurites are naturally occurring, especially if they are found near a pyramid. That makes it very, very interesting. And now the tektites. Again, very similar scenario. How were they formed? Extremely hot burning material traveling with great velocity in space or in the air. They are found at meteorite sites, but also at other craters, like this one in Uzbekistan is a perfect example of a non-meteoric crater with tektites. There is an excellent article about them in the description, you can read it. Also, Nikolai Sobotin mentions that they are sometimes found at the nuclear test sites. Well, one thing is sure, this group of fortresses was destroyed in a really hot hell. They were not simply built by chance in a valley that was a crater long before that. No, first of all, the top layer of the sand on them is burned, and the pieces of black slag still cover the valley. Second of all, the strange holes. And third of all, the very destruction pattern of the fortresses doesn't look like a natural erosion. How can a large fortress erode completely and there are no leftovers? For example, at the site called Ayaskala, there are two fortresses next to each other. One of them is very well preserved, while the other one is completely gone missing. Only the basis of some trenches or something has remained. Where are the erosion leftovers? If it was a natural process, the eroded material should have been besides the fortress, besides the remains, but it is not. Now, these fortresses may not look like something very special at first sight, but this wouldn't be necessarily correct. Let's see one example of a fortress called Koilkrilgan Kala. This is how it looked like before the archaeological excavations began. This is how the actual excavations proceeded in 1956. But apparently it wasn't to their liking, so they decided to bury it back. This is how it looks nowadays. Now this resembles very closely the fortresses found all over a full region of Russia. The most famous of them would be Arkaim. You can see when they start digging, a very much industrial looking landscape emerges here. I would say not bad for something that is supposedly some 4,000 years old. Or at least that is the official dating of the site. Despite the obvious similarities of design and functionality, as we are going to see shortly, still the history textbooks continue to maintain that people were quite limited to their area at that time because simply they were very, very primitive. And not only that, identical style settlements are found all the way in Turkey. For example, Nursun Tepe. Tepe simply means hill, that's why you will hear it very often. Also, Göbekli Tepe. Again, we have official dating here 4,000 years old. Wow, I don't know if that's true, but it certainly doesn't fit the rest of the stories they are telling us. While people were supposedly banging their heads with sticks only, at that time, all of a sudden, they came up with the idea to build this industrial complex. By the way, only the crown part of it is half a kilometer wide. That means the basis must be 1 kilometer. This is enormous. And then we read the descriptions of the site. The walls were covered with plaster and murals. My God. And all we have left of this site are a couple of photographs and scarce information because the site itself is submerged under the waters of an artificially created dam, water dam. Only a very small portion of the site was excavated before it got submerged in the waters. Why they didn't call archaeologists? I mean, why to submerge it to start with, and then if they think it's unavoidable, why not call archaeologists to dig actively before it is submerged? Everybody who studies archaeology dreams of such opportunities for all their life, and very few of them get it. Don't get the opportunities simply because the excuse for not allowing digging at many archaeological sites is their so-called protection. What kind of protection are they talking about if the full thing is gonna get trashed very soon completely under a dam? So we have these three groups of settlements or groups of fortresses in faraway countries, faraway regions, and not only their looks and shape are similar, most importantly, they were all used for smelting ores that are rich in metals, mainly copper. This is not decisively proven in the case of all the fortresses in Uzbekistan, but they're not very well studied anyway. I mean, what to speak of study? Some of them are not even catalogued. Means no name, no information. The group of Nikolai Subbotin simply stumbled upon them when they arrived on the spot. And here emerges the connection to the topic that I have labeled as forbidden metallurgy. I have two long videos on this topic alone. Basically, the knowledge of smelting ore was not discovered, it was given in a ready-made form to these tribes. It is hard to say yet which party exact introduced this knowledge amongst the relatively primitive people at that time, because different parties have been interacting with the human race for eternity, pursuing their own ends. Some of them were to emancipate the culture and technology, of the human race. Others were simply using us as slaves. Others simply killed us by fire from the skies. It would be interesting to see how the Uzbek fortresses would have looked like when they were in their prime time of use. Maybe something like this, although it belongs to a relatively more recent period, some resemblance is there. It is again an Uzbek fortress. So traces of colorful pigmentation was found on the old eroded fortresses. Were they as colorful and picturesque as all of the other relatively more recent fortresses in the region? And how did the residents look like? Well, this is a traditional Uzbek lady. If somebody makes a survey as of who is the most famous prophet, probably most of the so-called educated people on this planet would say Nostradamus. And that's because of the mass media, especially because of the documentaries aired by the biggest channels. Nostradamus is their favorite because his verses are quite vague and can be twisted easily in almost any direction. And so the mass media does interpret them in ways to serve its agenda, which is to artificially boost the feeling of hopelessness and the expectations of a dark future for the human race. In this manner, the sheeple would be expected to swallow up easier the dark future that is being prepared for them. And they will even take an active part in creating this dark future naively believing that this is the natural flow, that this is the most likely option, and that gets a subtle confirmation by another fraudulent idea implanted in people's minds, again by the mass media, and that is the very dangerous belief that all this pollution, war, and other nonsense are a natural byproduct of the progress and the emancipation of the human society. In reality, they are neither natural because they are artificially implanted by the authorities, nor they are byproducts. In reality, they are just tools used during the controlled demolition of the human society that is going on at the moment. And deliberately confusing people about the very meaning of what is a profit actually plays a major role in this, because profits have been always the leaders of society. That is why people are not being informed that even in our modern times there are people who can make amazingly, stunningly accurate predictions, along with performing biblical-style miracles. Instead of informing people about the existence of such prophets even nowadays so that they can benefit of their teachings that aim at real peace and prosperity, the mass media has only stained the true meaning of the word prophet and is now gradually substituting it with the idea of some abstract vague verses of Nostradamus. And it seems to work pretty well. People don't even care to hear the messages of the personifications in human flesh of that divine fabric of creation, of which they are made themselves and to which many of them even go to pray to church. The human race has not only turned its back to its own engineers, the celestial beings who created us, we have even reached the point of almost forgetting them. But our creators and guardians have not abandoned us. This episode is about their messengers and about the new golden age that is about to start very soon. The miracles of these messengers are a proof that they are genuine, and the full concept of the new golden age coming very soon is not yet another fabrication of the parasitic forces that is meant to keep us silent while we are being slaughtered. First of all, I want to tell you about Bruno Gröning. He was a simple man without higher education. By trade, he was a carpenter and did other types of manual labor. Carpenter. I wonder why that sounds familiar. Bruno was mystic and a healer. Seriously disabled people were coming on wheelchairs. After seeing him and listening to him, they would be immediately able to walk and even push their own wheelchairs. Others were in such a serious condition that they were brought on stretchers by their relatives. All they did was listen to him, take his instructions to heart, and they were also cured instantaneously. I do encourage you to see the videos, the links to which are in the description. Many of the people who got miraculously healed are still alive to tell the story. Many others were studied by the medical professionals at that time. I wonder where was the church at that time? Was it too busy not to hear about him, to not canonize him as a saint, to not recognize him? It must have been taking a nap, and it seems it's not out of its slumber yet, because entire nations, the population of which considers themselves to be Christians, organize bloody and cruel wars. Sadly, the church doesn't find time to remind them that this is fundamentally non-Christian. The government of Germany at that time ordered the mass media to lie about Bruno Gröning. In the documentaries, you can see a journalist of that time testifying in front of the camera about it. But it didn't work. People were arriving by trains, by foot, by any type of vehicle. They didn't know the address, they only knew the name of the village, and they would hear from him and get healed. But the government did not like the idea of the people of its country being healed. That is why they instigated a number of legal cases against Bruno on the grounds that he is healing people without having medical education. Their devious schemes succeeded, and he was no longer allowed to heal at the end. And because he took birth on this earth in a human body only for the sake of others, when he saw that the humanity in general is not yet ready to accept his message, he felt that he has got no more business here and left this earth at a relatively early age. He also had the powers to see the past and the future, and he told us that a new age is coming very soon, an age when everybody will have the powers to heal like him. I believe him. His word of honor is worth more for me than the words of all the millions of quackademics that assure me that they have dissected the universe and have definitely figured out everything already.
There's a feeling inside, so deep and so wide, so open and free. When love is revealed, all beings are healed, so naturally. When you let go of fear, the truth will appear.
And now a bit in terms of a more precise timing of the events that will bring about this new peaceful era of development of our society. To the best of my knowledge, the most reliable source so far in terms of the timing of these events is the relatively less well-known prophet from Bulgaria, and that is Slava Sivrukova. She is quite remarkable because she has a lot of predictions that have come true. For example, the unification of Germany made decades before it actually happened, or the fall of communism, the appearance of the European Union, again, that was predicted many decades before even the idea should have been conceived, and many other events of the local politics. The predictions were made in a clear language that doesn't allow 1,000 interpretations, which is the case with many other prophets. And in addition, they were recorded and published in books. There is a good amount of books devoted to Slava Sivrukova. So they are most definitely genuine and not some questionable article that was written after the events occurred. You can make yourself familiar with further details about those predictions in the link provided in the description. And actually Slava Sivrukova is quite an amazing person. She's been awarded honorary titles by a number of internationally famous universities for her works in physics. She did not have any formal education of physics, but she was approached by scientists. They directed her to what kind of particles she should examine, because at that time the microscopes were not developed enough to see them so close, and she gave very accurate descriptions of those particles. She zoomed in with her astral vision and saw these particles of which the matter consists. Later on, when microscopes did evolve enough, her observations were confirmed. Now let's get on to the interesting part, the transition towards the New Age. According to her, the turbulent times of the transition will start in the end of the 20th century. I'm using future tense because that was said decades ago. The dawn of the actual New Age, according to her words, would be around the year 2050, and the beginning of the New Age would be after year 2075 or around the year 2100. Before that, there will be a difficult period with intensified natural disasters and plenty of wars. There will be a couple of periods of more intensive calamity, but she mentions only the period between year 2025 and year 2032. And if you wish to get a further assurance of the accuracy of her predictions, you can look for future events which will happen before year 2025, and this is a minor and a very local event, local for Bulgaria because that's where she hails from. She predicted that part of the territories of the country will be taken over by purely peaceful means, without a single gunshot, she said, by Turkey. Now, this was really unthinkable so many decades ago when she said that, but the current political situation definitely shows something like this brewing. And if you see it in the news within the next, 8-9 years, please remember this video and be sure that the rest of her prophecies will come true. Now, a bit more specific information in terms of regions. Europe. Due to natural calamities, large parts of the continent will be submerged underwater. Those who live in the highlands will survive. Exact timing was not given, but the general impression is that it will happen before year 2075. She also foresaw the terrible economic crisis in Europe. Well, it's gonna get terrible in the future. The worst of it would be after year 2025. At that time, the general population will be still not aware what is the real cause of all this economic crisis. Many of them will be starving and still will not understand why. But the few small details that she gives about the floodings make them look, at least to me, not as severe as the ones shown on the Edgar Cayce flooding map of the future, which does not mean that the Edgar Cayce map has no credibility. Maybe he has taken the snapshot of the Earth at the time when the waters were at their highest level, and later on maybe they could subside. And next is America. Slava Severukova said that many talented and special souls will be born there, but also unfortunately the Empire of the Evil will make its capital over there as well. Unfortunately, it will share the sad fate of Europe, and its territory will be drastically reshaped by tectonic movements and floods. The changes that will these tectonic plates movements bring to the geographical map of the world will be considerable. Entire nations will go missing. And whoever survives these natural calamities will be most likely killed in the wars that will follow them. Those wars will come to write some of the most shameful pages of the history of humanity. And so by the end of the 21st century, there will be very few humans left alive. But those who survive will eventually understand the uselessness and stupidity of all wars, and from them the next highly evolved human race will emerge. Technology will continue evolving in a miraculous way. Very soon, Slava Severukova says, the highways, I see them overgrown with bushes because people will have their private flying vehicles in the not so far away future. But that will be very short-lived because as science advances, it will turn to what I call in my documentary series the science of the survivors, or what is commonly known to people nowadays as magic. Actually, magic and technology are the very same thing. Just the higher levels of technologies have been labeled as magic by the parasites so that they can declare them as non-existing, then make people believe it with the help of their most powerful weapon, the mass media, and so the access of the Earth residents has been cut off, and currently they cannot take advantage of the amazing technological achievements of the survivors. And then Slava Severukova describes in detail what kinds of technology will come after that. She says people will not need technical devices and cell phones anymore to talk to somebody on the other side of the planet because they will use telepathy. Gradually, they will abandon also their TV sets because with their astral vision, they will be able to see much more and much clearer. She says in a couple of centuries, everybody will be able to see like me. This is why there were highly advanced technological civilizations in the past, but we don't find that many remains as we expect because we don't understand what kind of technology exactly did they use. In future, we will adopt the advanced ways of the past as we rediscover them and remember them again. As the new age begins and people start living in a natural way in their natural environment, their lifespan will become longer, reaching up to 170 years, and even that in the not so far away future, meaning in the beginning of the new age. Now, interestingly enough, the year that Slava Sivrikova gives more or less as a start of the new age is 2075, and that is exactly the year given by the set personality channeled by Jane Roberts. The channeling is found in her books. Set Speaks, Nature of Personal Reality, and a dozen of others. And this is the only channeled material for which I think we have a serious confirmation and reasons to believe that it is absolutely genuine. One of the reasons for which I consider them to be genuine are the details given by Seth regarding the afterlife. These details were confirmed very well years after they were published, and it happened because the past life regression techniques evolved. And these details about the afterlife and the details of the existence on the astral plane were not confirmed by a couple of people who have read New Age books and maybe even the books of Jane Roberts, but by hundreds of thousands of people who have undergone past regression and have been telling about the other planes of existence. Many of these people, actually most of them, are simply patients who need help sorting out their internal world. They don't necessarily believe in astral existence or have any interest in it or have read any materials, New Age publications on it. And combine all this with the fact that Jane Roberts and her books are not extremely famous. Okay, they are translated, they are international, but she's not an author that everybody has heard about or an author that everybody has read. So there is absolutely no chance that those small details have been known, what to speak of being believed by those thousands of people who confirmed them during their past life regression sessions. And this is only one of the reasons. There are more for which I think the set channeled material has to be taken very seriously, of course, by those who are interested about finding the truth about their real self. So Seth clearly says, by year 2075, the transition towards the new age, the new peaceful society will be completed. And then in one of the less famous books of the Seth series called The Education of Oversoul 7, Seth gives curious details about one of the possible timelines which the humanity will follow during this transition. This timeline unfolds like this. By the end of 21st century, the glorious human race manages to completely trash the planet with pollution and nuclear skirmishes. And after the people understand that they can no longer even breathe here, they take to the skies and they build floating cities in Earth's orbit. And this book, The Education of Oversoul 7, contains the fascinating account of a young boy that escapes the floating city because he has a dream to start new type of society on Earth that will respect the planet and will live in a natural way. Upon arrival on Earth, he meets people who have been already attempting to do this for some time. And those people have been deciphering information from all the ruins that have manifested on Earth after the New Age started. We'll return to this point later on when we review Mother Shipton's prophecies. Now I just wanna finish off with the floating city topic, and the set materials are not the only source of it. There is one other published book by a psychiatrist, I believe, who got hold of a very interesting hypnosis subject who traveled to the future and was one of the residents of these floating cities. The information about the floating cities in both books absolutely matches. And to translate it into survivors' terms, the parasites, they gathered together and they built the floating cities and completely established their rule there. By that time, they have managed to demolish, under the excuse of nuclear skirmishes, all the major Roman and Greek effigies and almost any historic ruin that they could get their hands on. Only pictures of them were left for the future generations. They managed to destroy all artifacts and pieces of evidence of the old history. They proclaimed their new history as something indisputable, and the life philosophy of these people living in the floating cities is absolutely materialistic and devoid of any connection with their spirit. For example, when a person from the floating cities was questioned by this hypnotist, he was asked, "What is your religion?" And he said, What is your what? Oh, he said, I remember, yeah, we studied this in history. There were religions and spirituality and other nonsense in those old times. Yes, there was a mention about it. In reality, the scientists, even mainstream one, are discovering and will continue to discover a lot about astral life, near-death experiences, telepathy, psychic powers, reincarnation, and they will learn a lot by the end of this century. But when the parasites isolate the people on the floating city, they will simply lie that no, this never happened, there wasn't anything like that, there were some just only old superstitions. While on the other hand, the freedom communities, and that will remain on Earth, will start learning from nature and from old knowledge that will become accessible to them in a special way to facilitate their learning. So in terms of the future of your individual soul, if you are very much inclined and all these technological gadgets are the most important thing for you in the existence, you will have the opportunity to continue getting reborn in such an environment in the floating city communities. Over there, life will be peaceful and maybe even quite nice according to some people's standards. There will be no more wars because there will be no need of staging such. The parasitic takeover will be complete. But if your inner self is more interested in exploring the mysteries of consciousness, then you will get the opportunity to be reborn on planet Earth and get advantage of technological developments that are far superior than the technical one we currently know of. But your preference will be only one of the determining factors. Another very important one is the set of beliefs that you have cultivating during your numerous reincarnations. Let's put it in simple words with a very easy example. If somehow or other you maintain the belief that war is under any circumstances an option for human behavior, this belief of yours may make you unsuitable candidate for reincarnation for that future society on our planet, because people at that time will not be interested in these types of behavior models, And when they plan their future children, when they put the energy of the individual soul that they are calling as their child, they will be calling for different types of soul, and you will not get a chance. The same will apply for all types of beliefs that harming others or harming the nature around can have some sort of excuse. And if you still believe that you are actually a very good person, but others around you are bad and are provoking you to respond with violence, insults, or anything else of that sort, all I can say to you is that the fact is that you do not understand the law of karma will not make you unsusceptible to it. Again, if you believe that if in future you are born in a paradise-like environment, you will of course be a very good person because there will be no problems provoking you, I would like to tell you that you are absolutely wrong. You are absolutely wrong. Reality is different. You don't need to wait a few hundred years to exist in a more subtle astral environment, or what usually people call existing in higher dimensions. Many people get temporary access to it even now by using magic mushrooms, Marita muscari, ayahuasca, and many other vehicles that get them there. Some of them get tossed into so-called bad trips. These are extremely unpleasant experiences that happen even to people with very positive outlooks. The reason for which they get dragged into these horrible experiences is the presence of a karmic seed of such experience buried deep in their psyche, or karmakshaya, depository of their karma, which can be translated also as set of beliefs. As the soul starts functioning in higher dimensions of existence, such karmic seeds get manifested much more quickly. That environment is very similar to what everybody has experienced during their sleep time in their dreams. Everything changes very fast. You fly quickly from here and there. You end up in different situations without being physically transported from one location to another. What most people experience in dreams is very similar to living in higher dimensions, but there is a big difference. Most of us do not have control over the environment, over the happenings, the events in the dreams, while people who get born with a proper body in a higher dimensions environment, he knows how to control the environment around, and this environment reflects his karmic seeds in a flash compared to us, because we plant a seed now and we eat its fruits in few lifetimes. We live in such a dense environment currently that it happens very slow, while in the higher dimensions it happens very quickly. So people who still have in their karmakshaya a lot of seeds of darkness will find it very frustrating and unpleasant. The higher dimensions are not for them. And that is why the arrangement of karmic reincarnations works like this. First of all, one learns the basic lessons of karma in a more dense environment, in the same way as you learn car driving initially on a very low speed. And once you master the basics, you can drive sports cars as well. And the removal of negative karmic seeds does not take place when a hairy, smelly devil boils you alive in a pot of oil. It happens when you sit and give yourself time to think. There is a much more sensible way to do it. You can read more about it in the books of Jane Roberts and also the compilations of Dr. Michael Newton and Dr. Brian Weiss. And back to the floating cities, below in the description there is a link to a free PDF file with the book, but I would advise you reading it only after reading at least a couple of other books of Seth Jane Roberts. Otherwise you will find it absolutely confusing, probably won't understand anything at all, and you will wonder why you're wasting your time with this book. And it might be worth using online translator and having a look at the website about Slava Sivrikova. There are small curious things over there. For example, about the first Russian astronaut, Yuri Gagarin. She says that actually he was not the first one, he was the 10th. The first 9 attempts were unsuccessful. She doesn't give details, but I get the general impressions that simply the spacecrafts exploded in space. And then the spaceship of Yuri Gagarin was actually launched a few days before the officially announced date. They wanted to get sure that it all happened really and he didn't die over there like the first few. And after they saw it's going on okay, then they announced it to the public. Although Slava Sivrikova did get some recognition while she was alive, she never got really famous. Maybe one of the reasons is that at the very same time, again in Bulgaria, Baba Vanga, whom I call the most extraordinary shaman of our modern times, was accepting and helping people by thousands. Now, what do I mean by the greatest shaman of modern times? It's entirely possible that extraordinary individuals are taking birth amongst the unknown tribes in the Peruvian and Brazilian, Ecuadorian jungle, Siberia, Southeast Asia, but we simply don't know about them. So Vangelia Gushtirova, that is her official name, was born in a family of simple peasants. As a child, a powerful storm lifted her off the ground, tossed her away, injuring her badly. That is how she permanently lost her eyesight. Although her eyes remained permanently sealed off till the very end of her days, still she was able to do the household chores because she was seeing around with her astral vision. For example, one of these thousands of people who came to her for healing remembers the following episode. She advised him to take a certain herb for his illness, and then she asked some relative or a friend of her to go in the backyard and pick up some of it. As she continued talking with the man seeking help, all of a sudden she spoke very loudly to the lady who was on the backside of the house. Don't pick up those leaves because they grow in the sun. This herb helps when its leaves grow in the shadow. This is how well she used to see. She lived a long life and spent each and every single day of it helping the thousands of people that were sieging her house, waiting for months to see her with all kinds of unsolvable problems. As the people would come in and sit down, she wouldn't ask them why they have come. Immediately, she would start telling the stories out of their lives, which in their turn led to the problems because of which these people came here. The accuracy with which she could see things was quite amazing. She lived through the war, and at that time the women whose husbands were fighting would come to her all the time and ask her, is he alive, is he coming back? And very often Vanga would tell them even the very date on which the husband would come back. Actually, a team of scientists spent some time with her in her room, and although of course their conclusion was that there is no scientific calculation explanation of all this. Still, they calculated as much as they could, and the result was that 70% of everything that she sees is correct. Her accuracy could be rated something like that of Edgar Cayce. Definitely he saw too many things to make it clear beyond any doubt that he had special abilities, and yet some of his visions did not come true. It is not by chance that another observation another statistic made as of the accuracy of the historic events as they are seen by people under past life regression is also 70%. Well, apparently 30% do tend to get lost in the translation when information is transmitted from one plane to another. But yet not always, because Slava Sevrukova seems to get it right all the time. But in the case of Vanga, I think it's more of a language problem in terms that she hasn't seen much of our world to understand it so well, to the point that she can transmit everything in a fashion the way we understand it. She was always blind, not much education, she hasn't been anywhere much around at all. She frankly told people, you have absolutely no clue in which world I actually live and what I see. And by the way, her general opinion about our understanding of what history has been is as follows. People nowadays don't have the slightest clue of what the history of their planet was actually. But then she continued, times will change. People will unearth amazing golden cities, and then they will become aware of who they are and why do they get born here. Vanga was quite famous. For example, even the presidents of many countries would come to her humble hut. My favorite is the meeting with Leonid Brezhnev. He came and he sat on the simple table where she was accepting guests. And since he saw a blind woman in front of him, first he wanted to make sure that she knows who is he. So he sat and asked, do you know who am I? And she said, yes, I know who are you. Do you know who am I? Hitler also paid a visit to Vanga himself, but she chased him and his people from far away. As the group of men were approaching her house, she turned them off by shouting, don't come here and tell your boss that he will not conquer the world. Countless reports show that she was not extremely favorable to people with dark intentions, and she would tend to chase them away even before they enter her hut. Now, in terms of actual predictions about the future of the planet, many times she spoke, it is also recorded on video, that the great peace is coming. That's how she called the new era. That was also her very last message before she died. Don't you worry, all of you, the great peace is coming soon, very soon. Well, some people were complaining about the situation in general, and they were asking, when is this peace coming? We are tired of waiting. Her reply was, you are too much in a hurry. You are not gonna see this with your eyes. It's your children who will see it. Syria has not yet fallen. She definitely spoke about a cruel war that will sweep through the Middle East. At least half a century ago, she said that Syria will be in the middle of this conflict. And after Syria falls, according to her, whatever that means, then an apocalyptic chain of events could be expected. She also mentioned that the people who will live through this war in the world will not even understand who is fighting who. I find this to be an absolutely correct observation, and if you are under the impression that these are some local Muslim terrorists over there, I would strongly suggest that you consider other source of getting your news. Now, if you use the search engines to look for Vanga's prophecies, most likely something like this will appear in your screen. this timeline started appearing in the media while Vanga was still alive. It emerged after a Russian journalist visited her and after that published this in a Russian newspaper. Now, there are Bulgarians who are actually trying to study Vanga because she said so many things to all these thousands of people who visited her daily, and all of it, almost none of it was recorded even in audio, what to speak of video, so her prophecies mainly remained scattered. So to say, they were not systematically available. So these people, the Vanga specialists, they all of them say that probably she did not say this and the journalist made it up. Because, first of all, she never told any of these things to anybody else. I mean, to the people who were close to her and her friends, she always talked about the new golden age coming very soon, and not about these things that appeared in the newspaper. And also, the other very important reason for which these are not considered genuine Vanga prophecies is the fact that it's impossible to go to just sit next to her for half an hour and get this information out of her. She doesn't present the timeline in this linear fashion that we would like to hear it. Yet on the other hand, in this set of predictions, we see the element of the Muslims invading Europe. Now this was printed quite a few decades ago. At that time, it would be sheer madness to suggest anything like that. While in the last few months especially, we see that it can turn into a reality very quickly because European governments are welcoming and importing military from the Middle East. I mean, this is a piece of information from the mainstream media, along with the genuine refugees who are indeed simple people running from the war that is ravaging their countries. They are people in uniforms belonging to what is usually labeled as dangerous terrorist groups. And not only that, but even the mainstream media doesn't hide that some of the so-called refugees are actually people with false passports. The European Union does not have any strict checkup are the passports genuine. They openly admit that there are thousands of people with false passports and yet they daily continue accepting them. So at this point, when the European governments are openly, without even hiding, creating suitable conditions for a Muslim takeover of Europe, I don't see any problem for the Nostradamus predictions that the Pope is running from Rome, fleeing from the Muslims to take place. But the point is, how did the journalist know about it a few decades ago? Well, either she just borrowed it from Nostradamus when she was making up her story for the newspaper, or alternatively, she might have gotten few seeds of truth from Vanga and later on concocted the full story around them. And because Vanga is famous, I recently noticed disturbing articles circulating in famous English websites where the earlier Russian article was taken, scrambled, ears changed, stories twisted, and a new prediction cooked up and published as prophecies of Vanga. In reality, what her friends and relatives certainly heard from her again and again was a timeline very similar to the one of Slava Sevrukova. But Vanga is my favorite because she is such a powerful teacher. For example, this is how she describes the most difficult years of apocalyptic events. Some people will be running abroad with their last money, hoping to escape. Others will even resort to digging holes in the ground just to remain alive. But all of this will be in vain. Only those with pure hearts and intentions will survive. Because the era of the big peace belongs to the pure-hearted, the others will be denied access. She was asked about how the life will feel like in this era of great peace. She replied that nobody will go to work as we do. Nobody will poison or dig Mother Earth to extract things from her. Everybody will be content because things will grow naturally around and everything will be clean and pure. And then people asked her, but what are they gonna do all day if they're not going to work? She replied that mainly they will take great care that the children grow up pure-hearted. Her description of how the humans will progress at later stages is also quite similar to the one given by Slava Sivrukova, developing of amazing psychic powers that for the most people nowadays would look simply miraculously impossible, like for example freely flying in and out of the body.
When you let go of fear, the truth will appear, so simple and clear.
And yet other absolutely amazing prophecies are those of Mother Shipton. Just listen what was published in a book 5 centuries ago. A carriage without horse will go. Around the world men's thoughts will fly, quick as the twinkling of an eye. Through towering hills proud men shall ride, no horse or ass move by his side. Beneath the water man shall walk, shall ride, shall sleep, and even talk. And in the air man shall be, in white and black and even green. In water, iron then shall float as easy as a wooden boat. Gold shall be seen in a stream and stone, in land that it is yet unknown. In those wondrous, far-off days, the women shall adopt a craze to dress like men and trousers wear, and to cut off all their locks of hair. They'll ride astride with brazen brow, as witches do on broomsticks now. And a roaring monsters, with men atop, that seem to eat the verdant crop. And men shall fly, as birds do now, and give away the horse and plough. The love shall die and marriage cease, and nations wane as babies decrease. And wives shall fondle cats and dogs, and men live much the same as hogs. Wow, Mother Shipton doesn't seem to be highly impressed with the crown jewel of evolution, the hogs. An iron monster, trembling fear, eats parchment, words, and quill and ink, and mankind is given time to think. Well, she seems to be an excellent poet as well. Not everybody would be able to compose such a beautiful description of the printing press. Iron monster, eating parchment, words, and quill and ink. A man is given time to think. The description of our present situation is not less accurate. And murder fall, and brutal deed, when man will only think of greed, and man shall walk as if asleep. Probably she refers to the hypnotic trance caused by the smart gadgets we use. As we saw in the earlier episodes, people walk into traffic, get injured, or fall off cliffs and kill themselves because they are hypnotized by their smartphones. And that is by thousands every year. The king shall false promise make, and talk just for talking's sake, and nations plan horrific war, the like as never seen before. The taxes rise and lively down, and nations wear perpetual frown. Well, I can't think of better words to describe our politicians than this, and just talk for talking's sake. And then she continues with the things that are yet to come. These mighty tyrants will fail to do, they fail to split the world in two, but from their acts a danger bred, an illness, leaving many dead. When pictures seem alive, with movements free, when boats like fishes swim the sea, when men like birds shall scour the sky, then half the world, deep drenched in blood, shall die. 3 sleeping mountains gather breath, and spew out mud, ice, and death. An earthquake swallows town and town, in lands as yet to me unknown. For those who live the century through in fear and trembling this shall do, flee to the mountains and the dens, to bog and forest and wild fens. For storms will range and oceans roar when Gabriel stands on sea and shore, and as he blows his wondrous horn, all worlds die and new be born. A fiery dragon will cross the sky 6 times before the earth shall die. Mankind will tremble and frightened be for the 6 heralds in this prophecy. For 7 days and 7 nights man will watch this awesome sight. The tides will rise beyond their ken to bite away the shores, and then the mountains will begin to roar, and earthquakes split the plain to shore. And flooding waters rushing in will flood the lands with such a din that mankind cowers in muddy den and snarls about with his fellow men. He bares his teeth and fights and kills, and secret foods in secret hills, and ugly in his fear he lies to kill marauders, thieves and spies. Well, this is such an amazingly accurate description of the current situation. Secret foods in secret hills, those are the bunkers. Many of them are getting built already. And then ugly in his fear he lies to kill marauders, thieves and spies. Yeah, that's what they are telling us, yeah, that they're killing marauders, thieves and spies. And the Hollywood promotes that fairy tale that the military is about defending your country from the others. Actually, all these secret services have no intention to protect you. They're doing something completely different. It's nice to see, though, that at least some politicians dare to tell the truth. The truth that all these staged wars have nothing to do with defending the interest of the population of any country at all.
Довод НАТО таков. Ракетный щит возводится не против вас, а против Ирана.
Вы меня рассмешили. Дай вам Бог здоровья, потому что уже конец рабочего дня, так, в принципе, уже спать пора. Поеду домой с хорошим настроением.
As more and more people become aware of this, and they simply refuse to participate in the stupid war into which their politicians are trying to drag them, then this will come true. These mighty tyrants will fail to do. They fail to split the world in two. Then Shipton continues. Man flees in terror from the floods and kills and rapes and lies in blood, and spilling blood by mankind's hand will stain and bitter many lands. And when the dragon's tail is gone, man forgets and smiles and carries on to apply himself too late, for man has earned deserved fate. His masked smile, his false grandeur, will serve the gods, their anger stir, and they will send the dragon back to light the sky. His tail will crack upon the earth and rend the earth, and man shall flee, king, lord, and serf. But slowly they are routed out to seek diminishing water spout, and when men will die of thirst before the oceans rise to mount to the shore, and lands will crack and rend anew. Do you think it's strange? It will come true. And in some far-off distant land, some men, oh such a tiny band, will have to leave their solid mount and span the earth for those few to count. Those who survive this and then begin the human race again, but not on land already there, but on ocean beds, stark, dry, and bare. Not every soul on earth will die, as dragon's tail goes sweeping by. Not every land on earth will sink, but this will wallow in stench and stink of rotting bodies, of beast and man, of vegetation crisped on land, but the land that rises from the sea will be dry and clean and soft and free of mankind's dirt, and therefore be the source of man's new dynasty. And those that live will ever fear the dragon's tail for many years. But time erases memory. You think it's strange? It will be. And before the race is built anew, a silver serpent comes to view, and spew out men of like unknown, to mingle with the earth now grown cold from its heat, and these men can enlighten the minds of future man, to intermingle and show them how to live and love, and thus endow the children with the second sight, a natural thing, so that they might grow graceful, humble, and when they do, the golden age will start anew. The dragon tail is but a sign for mankind's fall and man's decline, and before this prophecy is done, I shall be burned at the stake at one. My body is signed, and my soul is set free. You think I utter blasphemy? You're wrong. These things have come to me. This prophecy will come to be. So in this beautiful poetry of Mother Shipton, we see an excellent confirmation of the timeline, future timeline given by Slava Sivrukova. First of all, terrible natural disasters. Shipton calls them dragon's tail passing by first time. And then people manifest unbelievable cruelty, fight each other. And then the second disaster comes that sweeps almost everybody. That is the second passage of the dragon's tail. Again, we see people actively working on developing their astral vision, astral abilities. And again, she gives us key element of the new age, the fact that people will concentrate on educating their children to grow up as kind and loving individuals. And we have one new element. We see other benevolent races from the universe coming to help us in learning how to use our psychic abilities. Many people ask why don't the aliens don't just land in the midst of us and start educating us right now if they care so much about humanity. Well, they don't do it for the same reason for which gentlemen don't go to the quarters that are infested with criminals. The gentlemen definitely have a very important message that they can share with the bunch of criminals, but the problem is that those people are not ready to accept it. They will simply rob them, beat them up, and there will be no educational effect. Another interesting compilation of visions about the future are the Tarabich prophecies. Some people doubt their genuineness, but when I had a look at the actual research of such skeptics, it looked more like a smear campaign to me. But in any case, even those who doubt their validity, they themselves say that when they went to the village there were some sort of old manuscripts. Well, in any case, following the links in the description, you can make yourself familiar with the prophecies that has already come true. And I'm gonna read you just a few short quotes about the prophecies concerning the future and the current times. Men will build a box and there will be some kind of device with pictures inside it, but they will not be able to communicate with the dead even though this picture device will be very close to that world. With the help of this device, people will be able to see everything that is happening all over the world. People will drill wells deep into the earth and dig out gold, which will give them light, speed and power. The earth will shed tears of sorrow, because there will be much more gold and light on its surface than its interior. The world will suffer because of these open wounds. Instead of working in the fields, people will dig everywhere, but the real power will be all around them. Only after many years will people remember this real power, and then they will realize how foolish it was to dig all those holes. This power will also be present within the people, but it will take them a long time to discover it and use it. These people will live for a long, long time, unable to know themselves. When they do, people will much regret that they had not discovered that knowledge earlier because it was all so simple. They will believe that their illusion is the truth, although there will be no truth in their heads. People will start to hate clean air, divine freshness, and all divine beauty, and will be concealed in darkness. It will be impossible to tell men from women. Everybody will dress in the same way. A groom will take a bride, but nobody will know who is who. People will be lost and will become more and more senseless by the day. Men will be born not knowing who is their grandfather and great-grandfather. People will think that they know everything, but they will know nothing. The more people think that they know everything, the less they will love and care for each other. Hatred will be so great between them that they will care more for their different devices than for their relatives. People will trust in their devices more than in their closest neighbors. Those who read and write different books with numbers will think that they know the most. The learned men will live by their calculations, and they will do and live exactly as those numbers tell them. Among those learned men there will be good and evil. The evil ones will poison the air and the water, and will spread pestilence over the seas, rivers, and the earth. And suddenly people will start to die of various illnesses. The good and wise ones will see that all this effort and hard work are worthless, and that it leads to the destruction of the world. And instead of looking for wisdom and numbers, they will start to seek it in prayer. As they start to pray more, they will be closer to God's wisdom, but it will be too late, because the evil ones would have already ravaged the full earth, and men will start to die in great numbers. Those who escape will save themselves and their families, but not for long, because a great famine will appear. There will be plenty of food in the towns and villages, but it will be poisoned. Driven by hunger, many will eat from it and will die immediately. Those who wage the final war will have scientists who will invent different strange cannonballs. Burning people will be falling from the skies. Only one country at the end of the world, surrounded by great seas, as big as Europe. All will live in peace without any trouble. Not a single cannonball will explode on it or over it. The prophecies of Van Resenburg from South Africa are also extremely interesting, and they confirm the general sequence of events as given by Slava Sevryukova and Vanga. Van Resenburg should be taken very seriously for sure, because a good number of his predictions have already come true with an amazing accuracy. He concentrates more on the details of military action during World War III. Again, Syria comes up. Again, we see Europe devastated by Middle Eastern occupants in a blink. Again, terrible floods on continental scale. For example, Japan gets almost completely submerged. That was coming up, by the way, in a few other prophecies. And he also does give a hint about the peaceful times that are about to come after the end of World War III. He says that at that moment, a fair government consisting of people of integrity will start governing South Africa. People who perform miracles and prophets are not only a thing of the past. They walk amongst us as well. Unfortunately, the majority of people have become disconnected from their human essence to such an extent that they don't see much point to be interested in these exceptional personalities. Constantly attending to the apps on their smartphones has a much bigger priority. Perfect example of such a living saint would be John of God from Brazil. He has treated for free over 1 million people already in his life, and many of them have reported miraculous cure, or at least considerable improvement of their condition. His miraculous style of cure has been studied by a big number of medical professionals, who also concluded that there are genuine cases of what a common man would call miracle. The type of surgeries that he performs are still very far beyond the horizon of the front-age medical science, so-called science nowadays. The penguin professors don't even have any suggestions of what kind of anesthetic is working on the patient. Under normal conditions, this patient should be screaming with pain and should be losing gallons of blood. So wouldn't it make sense that people like John of God who are able to perform such surgeries, he is not the only one by any means, there are hundreds of others who do it as well, so maybe this type of people who actually do it would be expected to know how is it happening, and probably they will be willing to share it with the world. After all, they obviously care for the world, they are treating people usually for free all their lives. Yes, that's right. They do know and they want to share it. And this is exactly why they are pressed by government institutions to shut up, keep silent, unless you don't want legal problems. Even John of God himself is forced by the circumstances to be very careful what exactly is he saying to avoid legal trouble. So those who know are silenced by devious methods. Those who need the knowledge are being distracted by gadgets. And what is the result? The zombification of the human race goes on as planned. Since my words were not so kind in terms of your favorite gadgets, please don't misunderstand me. There is nothing intrinsically wrong with them. They are fine as such. The only problem is that the digital trans phenomena has been weaponized by the parasites with the intention to twist the very belief system of the human race and transform it into a parasitic one. Once a person is demoralized, once he's zombified, then he can be easily convinced to participate in this sad, chaotic circus that is currently being performed on the theater stage called Planet Earth.
Isto é o poder de Deus. Isto é quem acredita naquele grande arquiteto do universo. Eu nunca curei ninguém. O que cura é Deus.
And another interesting prophecy written some 1,000 years ago by a Russian queen named Olga and written down on a silver plate with the alphabet used by the Scythians. Amongst other things, she mentions, "This nation will drink from the bitter cup of sorrow, and that will last 1,000 years. And there will be famine, war, and even worse, evil-mindedness. The fraud kings, like vicious dogs, will trouble their citizens, and in their madness they will even change the history. They will bring about the destruction of their own nations." There are also other historic prophecies that deserve our respect. They are not some sort of recent concoction of a journalist who is assuring us that the end of the world is coming because the Mayans said so, and he tells us that even without asking the living Mayan tribes. There are many genuine old prophecies that are a precious wisdom that has survived for us through the ages, and examples would be the prophecies of the Native Americans, the nations that are still alive, and those of the old Islamic books. They do not give a very precise timing in terms of years when the actual transition to the new age will occur, but they do give a good description of the end times, and it seems we are living through them right now. This video is not intended to instigate fear, anxiety, or hatred towards anybody. just the opposite. It is meant to help you see the things from the right perspective. Each individual soul has so many incarnations and gets born and dies so many times that from a higher perspective, getting reborn is as dramatic as putting on a new suit. Although the chain of apocalyptic events described earlier in this episode can certainly be changed if the people as a whole start working on changing their belief system immediately. But in reality, any major changes would be highly unlikely because it simply takes time to learn one's karmic lessons. Too many people are seriously confused and at the same time show little intention to start working on themselves in the near future. This video is actually meant to help you prepare for the upcoming events on a personal level. When very difficult times come, many of us will have to face extremely difficult practical decisions. It could be very confusing because you may end up cut off from any telecommunication systems without much idea of what's going on in the world anyway. Or you could end up in a situation where you are given only wrong information and you have no access to the alternative media that still exists nowadays. There could be minimal or no external help, so the only thing you could rely on will be the purity to connect to your deep spirit. That is why, as a main priority, my main advice for everybody is to start studying the books, the compilations of Dr. Brian Weiss and Michael Newton, because to me they seem to be the absolutely best source available nowadays of transcendental knowledge. These are not books written by these medical practitioners. They have simply compiled the wisdom that thousands of their patients have connected to in the state of hypnosis while being connected to their higher selves. Their books are actually a scripture that is much more holy than all the other traditional holy scriptures, because the traditional religious sacred books have reached us in a translated form. We don't read it in original, we don't read the actual words that the prophet heard from the given angel. Although the original wisdom as given by the angel or the holy person, the prophet, was absolutely true, what is reaching us through time is only a reflection of different translators and people who are re-narrating the old story, and we are limited only to their understanding and their idea of what the angel or prophet said originally. We don't understand neither the language nor the mentality to which the prophet spoke. But the books of Brian Weiss and Michael Newton are completely different. We don't have any language barrier, and the people who are telling us about the other worlds are familiar with our mentality. The concepts that are used in their language are absolutely familiar to us, and this makes a great difference. Actually, after studying these books, you will be able to understand the scriptures of your own old religion in a much better way. And exactly now is the time to strengthen your spirit, and not in a couple of decades when the earth is burning in the apocalyptic fires. That will be the time of your final exam, not the time when you should start thinking about learning. Parasites are not to be hated. They don't exist without the permission of whom most people consider to be God, as by definition nothing exists outside of him. The parasites are simply examiners for us. For example, let's take the biblical episode with the mark of the beast. If this really does become a reality in the timeline that we live in, then the mass media will present getting this mark as some sort of fashionable and progressive way for the society. Judging from the biblical description, the free, independent alternative media will be absolutely silenced at that time. So many people won't have anybody to even remind them, oh, this is the mark of the beast, look what's happening, it's exactly like the biblical descriptions, this is devilish. Instead, it will look cool and fashionable in the beginning, nothing bad will happen initially to the people who take it. Indeed, they may have financial benefits initially, and then life will start gradually becoming difficult for those who haven't taken the mark. Many people will take it just because otherwise their children will not have proper food, proper clothes, will be looked down upon by other children, and so on. The mass media will daily assure you that accepting the mark is something perfectly normal to do, and most likely many people will fall for it. They will accept the mark, although they have been clearly warned about this dangerous trap centuries ago. And the worst implication of accepting this mark in future wouldn't be the fact that one's chances to remain alive till the beginning of the new golden age will be less, if any. Far worse will be the fact that this piece of technology or black magic, or probably most correctly black magic technology, will have an influence on people's consciousness and will make them carry out unbelievable atrocities and cruelties which will have to be paid for in future lives. Whatever you do to others, it will come back to you. At school, students are required to memorize all kinds of information that may not even be of any use to them during their adult life. And yet, for some mysterious, weird reason, other scientific discoveries which happen to be extremely important are not even included in the curriculum. And namely, the ones pertaining to how to live a happy life. A very good number of scientific studies have proven again and again, beyond doubt, that people who are prone to feeling compassion, kindness, and friendliness most definitely experience far more happiness in their lives. While people who tend to hate, to be revengeful and spiteful, simply remain unhappy throughout their lives. So as a result of this, most people are even unaware about the most important thing in their lives, how to be happy. And then within a few generations, the mass media makes them even forget that being happy is the main thing. And then this natural desire to be happy is gradually replaced with the idea that the goal of life is to constantly strive to get more money. Well, after struggling for money all your life, there is no guarantee that you will get them. And if you do get them, this doesn't mean that they will make you happy. But one other thing is sure, that you have spent your entire life worshipping the idols of the mafia, of the criminal banksters, which, with the tools of a dishonest monetary system, sucks dry the blood of the majority of the inhabitants of this planet while they're still alive. Many of us have been ignoring this problem simply because the smell of these garbage piles where these people live doesn't reach our clean house, and we have a computer and a nice car, and we think, well, it's not extremely honest. Yeah, the government are criminals, but I guess it should be all okay as long as I'm relatively fine. Well, it seems within the next few decades, many of us will have to taste our own bitter medicine, the one that we have been administering to the people on those garbage piles indirectly, by silently and passively supporting the financial and political system which was doing it for us remotely over there. The prophets who saw those times in their visions described them as times when the living will envy the dead. Well, maybe after we taste our own bitter medicine, then we'll realize simple truths like never team up with liars and criminals, and never do to others what you don't wish to experience yourself.
There's a feeling inside, so deep and so wide, so open and free. When love is revealed, all beings are healed so naturally. When you let go of fear, the truth will appear so simple and clear. When so simple and clear.
Relations centers in what are now Nashville and Cincinnati and Pittsburgh and St. Louis.
Why is it that top historians didn't know about such things? And why is it that they are not generally known among the modern public either?
That people are unaware of Hopewell and Cahokia as world-class achievements, of course, UNESCO World Heritage Sites. Not only did Kennedy, as a historian at the Smithsonian, not know about them, at least one president of the Society for American Archaeology had never been to Cahokia, even by the time he retired at the age of 70.
I'm actually one of the people who didn't know all that much about the Hopewell civilization, and in fact, I grew up in the Midwest. I'm from Michigan.
There were tens of thousands of architectural consequences that are now hidden behind our junk and our architectural achievements.
Once I started talking about it, I found lots of other Native people who had no idea that these sites existed and were there and what they were all about and the history of them. That, to me, in and of itself, is amazing, that that level of just silence around this.
We now know more about this silence. We now know that advanced ancient civilizations once inhabited North America, but have become lost to our modern memories, in part because of 19th century political and scientific agendas. Advanced ancient civilizations once inhabited the North American continent, and this fact was common knowledge just 200 years ago.
As Europeans moved northward from the Gulf in the 1530s and westward from Virginia after 1607 and westward from Plymouth Rock in 1620, they did learn that the place had been occupied for a long time by other people. George Washington saw major earthworks. The biggest architecture George Washington ever saw was created by Native Americans along the Ohio River.
They were viewed by the early settlers, of course. They were so plentiful that it wasn't a surprise to have one on your property. These things were common. Oftentimes, many of them were reduced to nothing because they were used for landfill in a growing village or a town or an upcoming city.
Thomas Jefferson was well aware that there were very, very big earthworks in the Ohio Valley, and he became aware, thanks to Lewis and Clark, that there were even bigger ones in the center of the continent around Cahokia and St. Louis.
What were these ancient earthworks? Ancient city walls, buildings, roads, burial sites.
Artifacts of iron were found, artifacts of hardened copper, stone tablets with writing. Regular farmers just plowing their fields would really turn up literally bushel baskets of arrowheads, spear points, etc. And these things were commonplace. But the mounds that we see and the earthen banks and the ditches, to see them in such a great quantity and number, there had to be, just had to be, a very, very large population here at one time.
None of that, virtually none of that, presents itself to us. Yes, in some small park-like enclaves, but downtown St. Louis doesn't have a mound center. Downtown Cincinnati doesn't have a mound center. Downtown Pittsburgh doesn't have a mound center anymore. Marietta is to some extent, Marietta, Ohio, defined by its ancient earthworks, but there's an awful lot that defines it subsequently. So the answer to that is we don't see it.
Some who authored the very first publications of the Smithsonian, or the earliest books on North American antiquities, described and illustrated things that would surprise most of us today.
Some people, such as Caleb Atwater and Squire and Davis, they believe the artifacts that they were finding around these mounds and cities and earthen structures, that this was representative of an advanced civilization. This is the very first publication of the Smithsonian Institution. This is the work that Squire and Davis were able to complete in the late 1830s, the early 1840s, in what's called the Ohio Territory, which primarily worked in the state of Ohio, showing the monuments and the vast cities and the greatness that they must have had.
Some of the sites that they surveyed and the maps that they made is our only knowledge that these sites even existed now, because they were destroyed or they were intruded upon and their original configurations were greatly altered.
The real question is, why were these sites not preserved? And why are these advanced civilizations not more commonly known of today? The answers can be found in two surprising places. First, in the 19th century implementation of the doctrine of manifest destiny, and second, in the then emerging conflict between evolutionary science and religion.
The three things that really kind of make up manifest destiny, this idea of American exceptionalism. Another idea encapsulated or included in manifest destiny is the ideal that not only are we unique and our institutions are unique, but we have a unique mission to spread that and to take that across the continent. And then the third area is that we are uniquely qualified or called. It is our destiny.
This idea of the different races not only having separate creations, but perhaps they also had different capabilities. That's where that played into it, because it's a small step from there to start talking about allegedly superior or inferior races, and that's exactly what happened.
Science did tell them that there were certain races that were superior and some that were inferior.
There seem to be two traditions in our culture with respect to acknowledging the accomplishments of our predecessors. The first is manifest destiny flowing westward out of New England and New York and Philadelphia. From Plymouth Rock onward, we are fated to progress across the continent, driving the savages before us, and we are going to redeem this place from barbarism.
This classic study on manifest destiny and then Roger Kennedy's application of it to understanding and accepting American antiquities just is a very obvious pattern.
The obvious pattern was that discoveries of antiquities conflicted with the thinking of European immigrants, that Native Americans and their ancient ancestors were mere savages.
The doctrine of manifest destiny allowed the United States government to classify the Native Americans as savages by their terminology, and by calling them savages, that would allow them to push them aside and basically claim their lands as America expanded in a westward direction.
19th century Americans would have found it more than inconvenient. Politically, it would have been impossible for them to have taken lands away from Indians, from any indigenous peoples, if they viewed them as having rights even close to what they had as American citizens.
As the archaeology developed as a new science and anthropology as a new science, and they would find these things, these evidences to show that there was a written language, that these people possibly did smelt iron, they did smelt copper, and they mined it, they carried it, trade over great distances. These were signs of a higher civilization. And that higher civilization idea or theory coming from our educated scientific community of the day became directly in conflict with the manifest destiny ideas put forth by the U.S. government.
Well, it's not surprising to me that Native people in this area at this time were working copper and had extensive knowledge of copper. As an Anishinaabe person who's from Michigan, I can tell you how critical and central copper is to our way of life, even today. With it being so central, of course, we had to be very skilled at mining it and having it be getting resources and sharing those resources and spreading them around. You know, it's not, for me, when I think about it as an archaeologist, it's not just the implements and the level of technology. It's the wider network that would have had to be developed to make that happen. You know, where the copper was coming from, how far away that was, and what I find students are always really surprised by is the extent of those kind of trade networks that we don't see again in this country until much later.
There was every pressure to see the Indians as intellectually inferior and primitive, and a whole set of policies that would keep them from showing that they were as intelligent and could do as well on their own if they had access to capital, if they weren't excluded from the opportunities of other Americans.
I relate to it very strongly as a Native person. It's this constant idea that Native people's ways of knowing and doing things, it can't possibly have been good. It can't possibly have been as good as these other ways of knowing or these other technologies.
Thankfully, not everyone was persuaded by this interpretation of the doctrine of manifest destiny.
From the very onset, both Catholics and Protestants and non-religious people and Jews, actually, from the very beginning, emphasized the probability that other people had been here before us, that we had to enter into a respectful relationship with them if we were going to learn anything and survive. Indeed, our survival depended upon them.
Sadly, this way of thinking conflicted with prevailing attitudes about Native Americans. Roger Williams, founder of the First Baptist Church in America, in the mid-1600s, believed that indigenous people were not only fellow seekers, but that, quote, the Indians were probably of Jewish descent of the lost tribes of Israel.
You do have missionary efforts, and some of these early missionary-minded folks are very ostracized and marginalized by their society. We see this all the way back in Massachusetts, even with Roger Williams. When he's first run out of the Massachusetts Bay Colony, he goes and he begins to minister to the Indians, and he's seen as a radical for that.
200 years later, Roger Williams would receive an ally in Mormon church founder Joseph Smith.
Joseph Smith claimed that the Native Americans were, in fact, just like the rest of us, just as good, just as valuable, and just as important as all of the rest of us.
Later, many other artifacts would turn up that suggested the presence of Middle Eastern cultures in North America.
Protestant priests, Catholic fathers, Jewish rabbis were seeing these possible links between the Native Americans and ancient Israel. These links included written records that had possible tie-ins to the ancient world.
There were certainly religious beliefs, thinking that the Native Americans may have been descendants of some Hebraic, Jewish, Israelite travelers to the Americas at different times, or of other Old World peoples at different times. And there are various things fueling these. There were religious, political, and social agendas.
Perhaps the largest documented religious artifact was this ancient city wall mound, recorded in Squire N. Davis's Smithsonian publication entitled Ancient Monuments of the Mississippi Valley.
So to see an artifact like that, or the context in which they would place an artifact like that, would be, especially something found in association with the mounds, would be, oh, that shows to us the presence of these people at that time here in the Americas. They were responsible for creating that artifact. They were responsible for creating the mounds and for introducing various cultural aspects into the Americas.
The idea that ancient inhabitants knew of and used Middle Eastern Hebrew symbols undermined the notion that Native Americans were isolated savages. It also conflicted with the emerging science of the day and would mark the beginning of a long-standing controversy.
Morgan followed the idea of English anthropologist of his time, which is the mid-19th century, in thinking that human societies evolved into greater and greater progress towards civilization.
Lewis Henry Morgan, along with Herbert Spencer, would be credited with developing theories of cultural evolution.
Cultural evolution is an interesting way of viewing human cultures. I think we still have some remnants of that with us today, but at the time, people strongly believed that this was how societies came to be, that there was one way to get to the kind of pinnacle of being a human, or the most evolved human. You go through different phases. You start out as a savage, you then learn and experience things through your environment, you work with your technology increases, you become somehow more advanced and move through the stage of barbarism, and then eventually you reach the pinnacle of being an evolved human, which is civilization.
Morgan's theories of cultural evolution labeled Indians as savages and some religious people as barbaric.
That was very racist, but was accepted by just about all the leading intellectuals.
If Morgan influenced the leading intellectuals of the day, what influenced Morgan? Contemporary Presbyterian preacher Charles Finney wrote this, quote, "Outcomes of enthusiastic religion in Western New York feed into the formation of ethnological conceptions for Morgan," unquote. One such outcome was the publication of the Book of Mormon, professed to be translated from the ancient record found in upstate New York by Joseph Smith. Smith claimed that this record had been written in a reformed Egyptian language. Morgan's ethnological conceptions would become the extreme opposite. Natives were not as evolved as those from the Old World. Morgan biographer Leslie A. White would sum up Morgan's views of religion. Quote, "If you were for theology, you were against science, and Morgan was definitely for science," unquote. Still, some modern historians believe that too much has been made of the 19th century conflict between religion and science.
The reality of the ancient American past got caught up to some extent in that set of bickers. The simple-minded controversy between science and religion has contaminated, distorted, and diverted both religion and science.
But people living at the time recognized a huge conflict between science and religion. In 1883, minister and scientist Dr. Stephen Peet, who was a member of 10 archaeological organizations, published one of the most thorough books on the mounds. He claimed that anthropology had become the battleground for all of the conflicts of thought now going on between revelation and nationalism, faith and skepticism, creation and evolution, etc. Another biographer, Thomas Troutman, would write that Morgan felt, quote, "the monolith of religion must be abandoned," unquote. Morgan's new scientific ideas were shared by fellow New Yorkers E.G. Squire and John Wesley Powell, who would both become highly influential in science and in manifest destiny. Coincidentally, both Powell and Squire's fathers were Methodist ministers in 1830 in Palmyra, New York, and were likely part of the enthusiastic religious climate at the time.
Squire is very interesting. On the one hand, he early in his career, at the time when he's out here surveying and excavating mounds with his partner Edwin Hamilton Davis, he actually defended the intellectual capability of Native Americans. At that point in time, he actually argued that, you know, cultures as diverse as those in Mesoamerica and North America, he said, you know, that people who could invent calendars that were more accurate than those of the Greeks couldn't be said to be intellectually inferior, that, you know, he would defend their capacity to learn. A little bit later in his career, once he had become kind of an agent of, just during his diplomatic career, when he was a U.S. diplomat to Nicaragua, and he then is kind of an agent for American expansion. At that point in time, he's starting to talk about what he thought were these immutable scientific laws, that there were immutable scientific laws that explained the relationship between the races just as there were. So he's beginning to internalize more of this polygynous thought later on, but he sees it having application, so it's kind of a justification for American expansion.
Thus his role as an advocate for the United States expansion seemed to alter his views of the intellectual capacities of Native Americans. Powell, who also embraced these views of Native Americans and the underlying evolutionary ideas, would become one of the most powerful men in American scientific community.
He started the Bureau of Geological Surveys for the U.S. government, and then a spinoff from that was the Bureau of American Ethnology, the anthropology surveys. So his entrepreneur ability led to these two institutions within the Smithsonian, supported by the government, and was a great admirer of Morgan. Morgan also, you see, was an entrepreneur who was very successful. I mean, these are two guys that have a lot in common.
In 1876 in Buffalo, New York, Morgan joined with John Wesley Powell and others in organizing a subsection of the American Association for the Advancement of Science. And beginning in 1879, Powell, as Director of Ethnology and Surveys for the Smithsonian, and Morgan, who was the President of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, together created an entirely new direction for the Smithsonian.
There seem to be two traditions at the Smithsonian institutions, and they vie with one another. There's the Lewis Morgan tradition, in which there is a kind of stand on the shoulders of the preceding set of peoples way of looking at life, you know, savagism and semi-barbarism and semi-civilized and civilized and marvelous us. That's one way of looking at life. The other is the tradition that comes from Albert Gallatin, who was really the founder of the Smithsonian Institution, certainly the founder of modern ethnology and anthropology. Gallatin said, no, that's baloney. He called it racism. So there are two traditions. One's linear, and the other is, if not cyclical, respectful.
This new direction would not only include racist ideas, but additionally, it would attempt to limit the use of some artifacts.
I'd like to next read from the following, J.W. Powell's own words. This is a paper that he presented to the members of the Smithsonian at the Bureau of Ethnology, and the title on the talk is On Limitations to Use of Some Anthropological Data. And it's pages 73 through 86 of the 1879 and 1880 book that was published in the Smithsonian. And the quote is as follows: "Hence, it will be seen that it is illegitimate to use any pictographic matter of a date anterior to the discovery of the continent by Columbus for historic purposes."
Native Americans, even today, suffer from this policy, which effectively meant that Native Americans have no history.
You only have history if it's something written down. If you have an oral tradition, that doesn't count as history.
Part of the legitimating the conquest and dispossession and subordination of American First Nations is to disrespect their alternative ways of life, and that would include their systems of recording information.
Many believe that the Native Americans had no written record prior to Christopher Columbus. This would make it prehistory, but nothing could be further from the truth.
What you learn through ceremony has been taught and preserved on birch bark scrolls. Not like English is written in words, but there are pictographs that have been compared to, for example, Egyptian hieroglyphics. We do know that there are certain people who are charged with being the stewards of those scrolls and taking care of them, so they would have closer access to be able to look at and keep those scrolls.
Yet many still believe that Native Americans had no written language.
In fact, on the Department of Natural Resources website, you can see that it says, we have no idea who these mysterious people were who were creating these images. And yet, very clearly, our people, who are the traditional people of that area, we know exactly what those teachings are.
In fact, the Micmac have a written language that predates Columbus.
With a fully developed glyph system, you can say anything, the poetry, philosophy, technology, whatever, as one only has to go to China or Japan to see that their systems are the equal of any European writing system, but very different.
I don't know that everyone running around was creating scrolls and using those in the way we use language today, but it was still something that I think one person could create a scroll and another person would be able to read that had no connection to them.
What happened to these written records?
But it is another irony that we find that we're said to not have any kind of written language or history, and it's all stored in the shelves of the museums.
Every museum, small or big, has a great quantity of stuff that's boxed up that hasn't seen the light of day for literally 100 years.
And we've had the American Indian Religious Freedom Act in this country. You know, in 1978, supposedly we can practice our religion freely. However, our religion is intimately tied with the knowledge that's written on those scrolls, many of which are held in museums that we don't even have. Again, there's this irony of saying no written language, no sophistication, etc., but yet there sure is something that museums want to hold on to.
In fact, artifacts containing what appears to be written language excited great controversy when they were originally discovered. According to the scholarly journal of the Ohio Historical Society, quote, "No subject received more attention or stirred more controversy among archaeologists in the 19th century than the authenticity and presumed meaning of the engraved stone tablets that were periodically recovered from the mounds." Some members of the Ohio Association were among the staunchest defenders of a so-called lost race theory, and many had little doubt that the mound builders were descended from one of the ancient civilizations of Europe or the Middle East, most likely the seafaring Phoenicians of Hebrew or Mediterranean origin. Was the scientific community reacting to these origin ideas? Dr. Stephen Peet may have thought so, and actually charged wanton destruction of the mounds. Whether intentional or not, whether motivated by religious or political agendas or not, modern experts agree that wanton destruction did occur.
Manifest destiny, the idea that American First Nations had never achieved anything worth preserving, has resulted in the wanton destruction of thousands and thousands of earth constructions, mounds, embankments, figures, and settlements. So we have lost incalculable amount of archaeological data because of no appreciation of their value for historical purposes.
I think the origins of our pattern of obliteration and ignorance of the past of ancient America lies in two ways. First, we thought as a nation that we were starting something brand new. Our founding documents are full of new start, new page, new everything, new order of the universe, we say in our national sale.
Powell had become a national hero for exploring part of this new land, the treacherous Colorado River. But what he is not as well known for was his defining of the origin and evolution of Native Americans.
He was more interested in putting to rest what he called the mound builder myth, the idea that these mounds had not been built by the prehistoric ancestors of North American Indians. There were some people who were arguing that the mounds had not been built by any of the existing groups of North American Indians, and they would use the word race indiscriminately. There were others who did argue that no, these were non-Indian peoples in a biological sense, and that they were built by Europeans. But Powell was, what Powell really wanted to do, he had a research agenda at the Bureau of American Ethnology, and that was he wanted to unite archaeology and ethnology in the common study of American Indian. And what Powell wanted to do was break that idea down that, that archaeology and ethnology, in other words, studying living cultures of North American Indians, and then studying them on their own terms, documenting as they exist now, but also then looking at archaeology not as studying the record of some exotic European culture that was once here, but looking at archaeology in light of ethnology. That this was an earlier stage of existence among North American Indians.
The Powell agenda forced artifacts to be viewed only through the lens of currently observable savage Indian culture. Was this an artificial barrier to science?
We would say that's bad science, where you want to discount information because it kind of doesn't fit what you think you see. And what you think you see is, of course, all informed by all these theories and ideas and what you've been told. And what you see is what people saw at the time were these savages who were in this pitiful state.
Powell's vision of 19th century evolution was that Native Americans had evolved in North America for millions of years to a state less advanced than that of European immigrants. Robbing Native Americans of their history before Columbus may have served two purposes. First, justifying manifest destiny and the displacement of Native Americans. And second, dismissing of popular religious ideas that ancient Native Americans may have had Middle Eastern origins, and thus rights equal to those of European immigrants. Powell wrote, "Whether we desire it or not, the ancient inhabitants of this country must be lost, and we may comfort ourselves in the reflection that they are not destroyed, but are gradually absorbed and become part of a more civilized community."
So when that's what your framework is, of course, then it makes sense in a way, as troubling as it is, and the racism really that we're talking about is so deep there. It does make sense that that's your worldview. That's what you've been told. So none of this data fits. Rather than looking all of the data and trying to determine what story can we put together, what can we understand from this data, I think that's what happened. I think very clearly people were willing to discount things that didn't fit what they could see, which was Native people in this, pitiful, savage, wild state as they were viewed by Europeans.
Thankfully, some artifacts in ancient cities yet remain, such as these once city walls intentionally preserved as mounds in a golf course in Newark, Ohio.
I'm standing here at the parallel walls that connect the gigantic octagon with a large circle. The circle is 1,054 feet in diameter. The octagon encloses 50 acres, which is large enough to encompass 4 Roman Colosseums. This was built by the ancient Hopewell culture that lived in this region between about 100 BC and AD 400.
The level of precision, it is incredible.
The entire Newark earthworks encompasses 4.5 square miles, and it was the largest complex of geometric earthworks ever built in the world. It includes 2 circles, a gigantic octagon, a square. Actually, what we call the Hopewell culture, things like it at least, and things related to it, covered much of eastern North America in different parts. As far south as Florida, as far west as Kansas City, as far east as perhaps New York.
They had to be incredibly sophisticated to be able to build these mounds perfectly, in unison to an octagon shape and a circular shape.
It's clear that they rival, by any scale, any other cultural achievement in the world. The Great Pyramids, the Great Wall of China, the Roman Colosseum.
I'm not that surprised by it. There's so many other things that we see when we start learning about and looking into Native culture that I think people on the surface may be surprised, because they tend to think of Indian people as anti-intellectual or, you know, non-scientific, or somehow, you know, living in the backwoods and not knowledgeable about things like that.
The knowledge embedded in these earthworks and encoded in their structure is anything but primitive. It's remarkable.
You know, it also shows that not just high math, but these sites are lined up primarily with the lunar calendar. They had high math, they understood geometry, and because of the lunar calendar, they also understood the heavens, astronomy.
What I've learned now is just how amazing they were in terms of their knowledge of the solar system and of mathematics.
And then they had the unit of measurement was 606, which they call the stade. One side of the Great Pyramid from the base to the tip of the apex is 606 feet. If you square inside the octagon, which the surveyors like to call, it's a term they use, squaring the circle, and you divide that up into 4 equal parts inside of cubes, you'll find those cubes are all made of 606-foot lines per cube side. The angle of the Great Pyramid of Egypt runs 51.8 degrees up the slope from the base to the angle. That measurement is there, and when you come off of the baseline at Newark and you run true north and then measure that angle back to the baseline, what do we find? 51.8 degrees. So did they have the same math as the ancient Egyptians? Well, I gotta say, yeah, it sure looks like it.
It's as inspiring, I think, in its way as the NASA program to send a man to the moon.
And what a special place it is. You feel that right away. You feel it immediately when you're there. I was in a kind of strange position because I was on a job interview when they took me to the site, and I was literally, just from the presence of the place, moved to tears and felt kind of uncomfortable as a person in a job interview, but yet having these strong emotional feelings and some connection to this place and the history that was there. And it just occurred to me, how could this be?
The people who created the settled places, the agriculture, the urban design, the engineering, and the astronomy that preceded us, preceded we European Americans, are not quite us. They are other people, we felt. And in the European American tradition, there's a long, long history of our saying to ourselves, oh, no, that's those people. And those people can't be as good as us people. They couldn't have built those great big things.
Have these traditions affected our scientific thinking? Did we, because of cultural biases, fail to recognize the advanced nature of ancient mounds and artifacts?
The presuppositions that scientists go into the field with comes out of our cultural tradition. If you want to earn a living as an archaeologist in a university setting with the opportunity to teach and some support in publishing, you have to not challenge the senior people openly. And depending on the department, of course, there may be more or less egotistical senior people. It's like the chute in a corral, and the animals are basically trapped, and they can't go sideways, they just go through the chutes. You know, you can think of that as academic employment.
While not everyone in academia may agree with this position, if true, it may also be true that Lewis Henry Morgan and John Wesley Powell, in their time, helped to build the corrals of appropriate professional archaeological thought, casting doubt on many archaeological artifacts dating before Columbus as avocational, amateurish, and therefore questionable. Historian Barnhart disagrees with this notion.
But they were avocational in the true sense of the word, is that there was no professional archaeology at that time. There were no specialized journals of archaeology. There were no specialized conferences. That begins to happen in the late 19th century. But at that time, archaeology had no professional or institutional setting, and it was really done by a lot of talented amateurs in the true sense of the word.
As archaeology became institutionalized, a greater division would form between mainstream scientists and amateur archaeologists who continued to accept artifacts that were purportedly pre-Columbian and that might suggest the presence of cultures from other parts of the world. This latter group are known today as diffusionists. Diffusionists are scholars and amateur archaeologists who believe that contact between inhabitants of America and other geographies may have taken place before Christopher Columbus. Most scholars featured in this film believe that the ancestors of today's Native Americans came to North America across a land bridge that had formed during the Ice Age. With perhaps only one exception by the Vikings, no outside contact with Native Americans prior to Christopher Columbus is believed to have occurred. Diffusionists, on the other hand, believe that ancient Native Americans, such as the Hopewell civilization, might have traded, intermingled, or even originated from other cultures. A controversy surrounding artifacts found at the Newark, Ohio earthworks demonstrates the division between some diffusionists and most mainstream archaeologists.
This is one of the earliest maps that we found on the Newark earthworks. This is a drawing by Wyrick from 1860.
David Wyrick had done the first comprehensive surveys of the magnificent Newark earthworks. The first of what came to be known as the Holy Stones was found there, and 5 months later, at the Jacksontown Stone Mound a few miles southeast of Newark, he found something even more amazing.
They found one major earth structure in the center, surrounded by 12 small burials. David Wyrick went straight for the middle one with 9 other gentlemen, and they began to dig that mound down. And they uncovered it. When they did, they found a wooden coffin made out of oak. And opening up that coffin, in there was a large skeleton of a man, but also in this coffin was a little box, no more than maybe about 8 or 10 inches in size, and it was cemented shut. Wyrick and the men, while they're all there together, they pried this box apart, and in it was a black stone. They opened this box, and here was this unusual artifact.
We own the Newark Holy Stones, and these stones were found in a Hopewell mound in the 1860s, and the presumption from finding them was that perhaps the American Indians had some kind of contact with the Hebrews, or possibly they were the Hebrews. That's another idea. So we have the museum has been interested in origins.
They took it to some scholars, identified that it was probably some type of Hebrew. They took it to some rabbis living in the area, and upon looking at it, they said yes, they could read it. And it was a complete rendition of the 10 Commandments. They called it block Hebrew because they had never seen anything written like this, but they called it block Hebrew. And so then naysayers started picking on Wyrick. He was accused of sticking this stone in front of these 9 men somehow and being able to hide it and conceal it.
Upon examination, mainstream archaeologists proclaimed the stones a hoax, while many diffusionists continue to believe in their authenticity.
There has been good points on either side for whether they are a first millennium piece of artifact or something that was devised in the 19th century.
And then it wasn't until sometime in the 1900s, lo and behold, in Israel, they find, guess what? They found block-style Hebrew. That block-style Hebrew was given a name by the experts, monumental Hebrew, because of the way it was written. Long after Wyrick. After.
Mainstream archaeologists dismiss such findings, in part because scientific protocols and rules of evidence were not followed in their acquisition.
the science of archaeology was really in its infancy at that time. There were only a few people using what we would consider to be even remotely modern methods.
But what of the tens of thousands of artifacts found prior to the establishment of these modern methods? Should we ignore these artifacts because they have been irreversibly separated from their original surroundings? But diffusionists like to point to one artifact that has been dismissed by mainstream archaeologists, even though it was found using modern methods within the original surroundings.
They can't say that about the Back Creek stone because the Back Creek stone was found in the course of an official excavation by the Smithsonian Institution. Okay, then Back Creek stone went to the Smithsonian Institution in Washington. They didn't understand it. They thought it was Cherokee since it came from Cherokee country. They did not realize it was Hebrew. And they published it upside down, and then they threw it in a box in the sub-basement of the Smithsonian. And ever after it was poo-pooed until some Semitic scholars like Cyrus Gordon came and vindicated it.
Cyrus Gordon, who was one of the great Semitic scholars of our generation, he talks about the writings that were found in this very area and how he was able to translate those things, translate that writing. When it was turned over, they were trying to figure out what type of Native American wrote this, and Cyrus Gordon turned it upside down. He recognized that it was actually Phoenician.
Phoenician, this older form of Hebrew, dates to the Old Testament Babylonian captivity and the scattering of Israel. Are there other linguistic evidences that may lend support to diffusionist ideas?
As a scholar of ancient languages, I have discovered that there are many symbols in the Micmac that are very close and similar to those of ancient Egyptian. About 700 BC in Egypt, there was a language that was developed or came in that was called Meroitic from the kingdom of Meroe, which many Egyptian scholars have even called Reformed Egyptian because it's so different than what the standard Egyptian that we know. And this Meroitic is very close to some of the signs of the Micmac.
Anthropologists dismiss a lot of the stone evidence and inscriptions in these ancient languages like Egyptian and Greek and Hebrew by saying, well, they were not found in the course of an official excavation.
Are these diffusionist ideas simply a continuation of the controversies that existed in John Wesley Powell's day?
There were some people who were arguing that the mounds had not been built by any of the existing groups of North American Indians, and they would use the word race indiscriminately. There were others who did argue that no, these were non-Indian peoples in a biological sense and that they were built by Europeans.
Perhaps DNA science can settle once and for all the biological question of who, for example, the Hopewell mound builders were.
We can use DNA to help us reconstruct the past and the history of different populations because your DNA is passed down from your parents from generation to generation. There are certain types of DNA in particular that are very useful for reconstructing population prehistory. Your mitochondrial DNA is DNA that every person has, and you inherit it from your mother. Your mother passes it on to her children. Men don't pass it on to their children. And this type of DNA, therefore, gives us a measure of matrilineal relatedness. I collected DNA from and analyzed DNA from a couple of different Hopewell cemetery populations. When we looked at DNA from these two different Hopewell populations from Illinois and Ohio, we found that there were 5 primary mitochondrial DNA lineages present. These lineages have become designated by letter names in the scientific world, and the ones that we see in Native American populations, both living today and in these Hopewell cemeteries, were the mitochondrial lineages A, B, C, D, and X. And these 5 lineages are ones that are common today in Native Americans, and they were the ones that were present in these ancient Hopewell communities. When we look at the distribution of haplogroup X in the Americas, we see that it's present in about 3% of all Native Americans, but it's more common in some populations. In particular, peoples who live in the upper Great Plains exhibit much higher frequencies of haplogroup X, sometimes up to 25 or 30 or even 50% in some samples that have been studied. This research, the genetic research that we've done, really conclusively proves that the same mitochondrial lineages are present in ancient Hopewell burial populations as we see in contemporary Native American populations. And that very clearly establishes the relationship between these contemporary Native American populations and the ancient Hopewell.
DNA science apparently settles the biological questions of who these ancient advanced Hopewell mound builders were. But where else is this DNA found? And where did it originate?
The form of haplogroup X that's present in the Americas is known as haplogroup X2A, and this specific type is defined by a number of additional mutations that Native Americans who belong to haplogroup X share. This particular form of haplogroup X is not found in Europe. In fact, it's not found, as far as we know at this point in time, anywhere in Europe or Asia. But in particular, there's no recent connection to Europe and to European individuals who possess haplogroup X. The only similarities that we see are similarities that stem from much more distant, much more ancient ancestry that probably dates back 30,000, 40,000 years, perhaps somewhere in the Near East. And so what most likely happened is that this very ancient common ancestor of individuals who belong to haplogroup X had descendants who split and went 2 different directions. Probably some of these individuals moved to Europe, others moved towards Asia and up towards Beringia. And it appears that this Asian form of haplogroup X is what eventually made its way into the Americas. There have been some recent studies that have suggested that this particular distribution of haplogroup X in the Americas is most consistent with a migration from Asia through the Bering Strait over the land bridge and then down through the ice-free corridor. And so if individuals with haplogroup X migrated through that ice-free corridor, they would have first entered the continental United States and continental North America in the upper Great Plains, and it would make sense then that we would see the highest frequency of haplogroup X today in populations in that region.
Most mainstream archaeologists and historians would probably agree that this assessment is something of a contemporary final word on Native American origins. So does DNA science put much of diffusionist theory to rest? Diffusionists would answer no. The reason? There's a lot about DNA evidence that is a controversy.
I'm Cherokee Indian, and so I had a moral imperative to investigate my own family history and origins, and that led me to DNA. I was a professor at that time in Georgia, and with my research partner, Dr. Elizabeth Hirschman, we became interested in the mystery of our people. Haplogroup X is really a fascinating story because the X-Files of Native American genetics, because it burst on the scene in 1998. Scientists didn't want to believe it, but they found a new haplogroup in addition to A, B, C, D among the Indians of the Great Lakes in particular. And that was haplogroup X. And so immediately the scientists who have a kind of idée fixe, in my opinion, set about trying to find haplogroup X in Mongolia and Siberia, because of course all American Indians, all upstanding American Indians, came across the Bering Land Bridge chasing woolly mammoths, right? So they weren't able to find haplogroup X in Siberia. They found one case of it. That wasn't enough. Haplogroup X was a Eurasian type. So then they started talking about, oh, well, maybe they got here by jumping across the ice in a circumpolar fashion. Okay. Well, it kind of rested there for a while. As it turned, and last year, finally, the mystery of haplogroup X was revealed in a very important study by a team under Dr. Schluss, and he determined without any doubt that the origin of haplogroup X was the hills of Galilee. It was that clear. That's where, because where you have the greatest concentration and the greatest diversity, you have, that's the origin.
There's no controversy among DNA experts about the Middle Eastern origin of haplogroup X. The only question really is, when did it arrive in the Americas?
Most projections about ancient human history, prehistory really, are based on a mathematical and statistical model called phylogenetics.
What we find in the journals is that it is commonly thought among DNA experts that there was an outmigration of haplogroup X from the Middle East about 40,000 years ago.
That's a pure projection. You know, it's a mathematical progression going back to there based on how mitochondrial DNA mutates. Is it true? Who knows?
But what most people don't realize is that among these same experts in these same journals, there is controversy about the dating.
So, you know, I think these are projections.
The controversy is between those who assume a theory that man branched from chimps 5 to 6 million years ago versus those who are using newer actual findings from DNA pedigree studies. The theoretical dating gives much longer time frames, but the actual data shows a 20-fold reduction and would place the Middle Eastern outmigration of haplogroup X about 2,000 years ago, plus or minus.
Is it true that all Native Americans came from 10 families that stumbled across the Bering Strait chasing woolly mammoths before the last ice age? I don't think mine did.
Whether or not ancestors of Native Americans originally came from Asia over the ancient land bridge, or whether or not they had interactions with other parts of the world, one thing is clear: much of their archaeological record is now gone.
It is unfortunate there was such an opportunity there, and I don't think that people consciously were trying to destroy things or ignore things. I think that for me this was a case where, you know, expansion was the thing on everyone's mind and moving forward.
Victims of science and of the doctrine of manifest destiny, 19th century Native Americans were labeled as savages, and this helped to legitimize their suppression, subordination, and the taking of their lands.
The idea that manifest destiny trumped all is certainly, as far as I have been able to read, absolutely true.
I understand that these early scientists were in the kind of products of their time, in that that's what people were talking about and that's what they were saying, and so they believed that, yes, in fact, you know, Native people are savages who we can clearly see that. That's what they were thinking.
Disregard of their value resulted in the wanton destruction of thousands of artifacts and grand architectural achievements. and aided in erasing knowledge of their advanced capabilities from our collective memories. While scholars may disagree on the interpretation of remaining evidences, these remaining archaeological evidences may be keys to eventually recovering and more fully appreciating the buried history and culture of these ancient, lost civilizations.
I think it's important that we pay attention to the achievements of our predecessors. We may respect our predecessors a little more if we do. We certainly will respect our own responsibilities a little more if we look at the evidence that over the preceding 9,000 to 10,000 years, there have been several other periods in which, I'm assuming, proud people did proud things in the landscape and in cities. So there are important things for us to learn.
Since it benefits the wise to know all things in advance, of this you must not remain ignorant. A time will come when it will appear that the Egyptians had paid respect to divinity with faithful mind and painstaking reverence to no purpose. All their holy worship will be disappointed and perish without effect, for divinity will return from earth to heaven and Egypt will be abandoned. The land that was the seat of reverence will be widowed by the powers and left destitute of their presence. When foreigners occupy the land and territory, not only will reverence fall into neglect, but even worse, a prohibition under penalty prescribed by the so-called law will be enacted against reverence, fidelity, and divine worship. Then this most holy land, seat of shrines and temples now, will be filled completely with tombs and corpses. O Egypt, Egypt, of your reverent deeds, only stories will survive, and even they will sound incredible to your children. Only words cut in stone will survive to tell your faithful works. Only the neighboring barbarians will dwell in Egypt, for divinity goes back to heaven, and all the people will die deserted, as Egypt will be widowed and deserted by God and human. I call to you, O most holy river, and I tell your future. A torrent of blood will fill you to the banks, and you will burst over them. Not only will blood pollute your divine waters, it will also make them break out everywhere. And the number of the entombed will be much larger than the living. Whoever survives will be recognized as Egyptian only by his language. In his actions he will seem a foreigner. Asclepius, why do you weep? Egypt herself will be persuaded to deeds much wickeder than this, and she will be steeped in evils far worse. a land once holy, most loving of divinity by reason of her reverence, the only land on earth where the gods settled, she who taught holiness and fidelity will be an example of utter unbelief. In their weariness, the people of that time will find the world nothing to wonder at or to worship. People will find the very existence oppressive and will scorn it. They will not cherish this entire world, a work of God beyond compare, a glorious construction, a bounty composed of images in multiform variety, a mechanism for God's will, ungrudgingly supporting His work, making an unity of everything that can be honored, praised, and finally loved by those who see it, a multiform accumulation taken as a single thing. They will prefer shadows to light, and they will find death more profitable than life. No one will look up to heaven. The reverent will be thought mad, the irreverent wise. The lunatic will be thought brave, and the crooks will pass for decent people. The soul itself and all teachings about the immortal soul, as I revealed them to you, will be considered not simply laughable, but even illusory. But believe me, whoever dedicates himself to reverence of mind will find himself facing a capital penalty. They will establish new laws, new justice. Nothing holy, nothing reverent nor worthy of heaven or heavenly beings will be heard of or believed in their minds. How mournful when the gods withdraw from mankind. Only the malevolent angels will remain to mingle with humans, seizing the poorer wretches and driving them to every outrageous crime, war, looting, trickery, and all that is contrary to the nature of souls. Then neither will the earth stand firm, nor the sea will be sailable. Stars will not cross heaven, nor will the course of the stars stand firm in heaven. Every divine voice will grow mute in enforced silence. The fruit of the earth will rot, and the very air will droop in gloomy lethargy. Such will be the old age of the world, irreverence, disorder, disregard for everything good. When all this comes to pass, Asclepius, then the Master and Father, the Lord of the primeval fabric of creation, the governor form of the first God, will look on this conduct and these consciously committed crimes, and in an act of will, which is God's benevolence, He will take His stand against the vices and the perversion in everything, righting wrongs, washing away malice in a flood, consuming it in fire, ending it by spreading deadly disease everywhere. And then He will restore the world to its original beauty of old, so that the world itself will again seem deserving of worship and wonder, and with constant benedictions and proclamations of praise, the people of that future time will honor the God who makes and restores worlds. And this will be the rebirth of the planet, a reformation of all good things, and a restitution most holy and most reverent of nature itself, reordered in the course of time.
Fazer de Deus uma realidade, fazer de Deus uma realidade, que Ele fará de ti linda verdade, que Ele fará de ti linda verdade. Fazer de Deus uma realidade, fazer de Deus uma realidade, que Ele fará de ti linda verdade, que Ele fará de ti linda verdade. Fazer de Deus uma realidade, fazer de Deus uma realidade, que Ele fará de ti linda verdade, que Ele fará de ti linda verdade. Allow God to become a reality, allow God to become a reality, and He will make out of you beautiful truth, and He will make out of you beautiful truth. Allow God to become a reality, allow God to become a reality, and He will make out of you beautiful truth, and He will make out of you beautiful truth. Allow God to become a reality, allow God to become a reality, and He will make out of you beautiful truth, and He will make out of you beautiful truth. Allow God to become a reality, allow God to become a reality, and He will make out of you beautiful truth, and He will make out of you beautiful truth. Fazer de Deus uma realidade, fazer de Deus uma realidade, que Ele fará de ti linda verdade, que Ele fará de ti linda verdade. Fazer de Deus uma realidade, fazer de Deus uma realidade, que Ele fará de ti linda verdade, que Ele fará de ti linda verdade. Fazer de Deus uma realidade, fazer de Deus uma realidade, que Ele fará de ti linda verdade, que Ele fará de ti linda verdade. Fazer de Deus uma realidade, fazer de Deus uma realidade, que Ele fará de ti linda verdade, que Ele fará de ti linda verdade. Allow God to become a reality, allow God to become a reality, and He will make out of you beautiful truth, and He will make out of you beautiful truth. Allow God to become a reality, allow God to become a reality, and He will make out Gate gate parasamgate bodhisoha. 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 It's the heartbeat of the universe. It's the silence in our soul. It's the joy that makes every moment new. It's the bliss when we are whole. It's the heartbeat of the universe. It's the silence in our soul. It's the joy that makes every moment new. It's the bliss when we are whole. Om Shanti, Om Shanti, Shanti Om. Om Shanti, Om Shanti, Shanti Om. It's the heartbeat of the universe. It's the silence in our soul. It's the joy that makes every moment new. It's the bliss when we are whole. It's the heartbeat of the universe. It's the silence in our soul. It's the joy that makes every moment new. It's the bliss when we are whole. Om Shanti, Om Shanti, Shanti Om. Om Shanti, Om Shanti, Shanti Om. It's the heartbeat of the universe. It's the silence in our soul. It's the joy that makes every moment new. It's the bliss when we are whole. It's the heartbeat of the universe. It's the silence in our soul. It's the joy that makes every moment new. It's the bliss when we are whole. Om Shanti, Om Shanti, Shanti Om. Om Shanti.